Welcome to this special occasion, the Robertson Lecture of the Residential College. This lecture is an annual event that highlights topics in education and liberal arts. I am Catherine Badgley, Director of the Residential College and faculty member in the RC Science program. We are delighted to have so many of you here today and excited to have one of our own faculty giving the Robertson Lecture this year. I have two acknowledgments before introducing the occasion. First, the University of Michigan sits on lands granted by the Anishinaabe and Wyandot peoples, whose treaties and human rights have been violated numerous times during colonization by the United States. This history is a reminder that we must dedicate our scholarship to understanding the past and its legacies in the present and work to create a more just future. Second, I would like to acknowledge and thank Rudy Thomas for his technical assistance in making this event possible. He is the wizard behind the curtain for this occasion. The annual Robertson Lecture is named in honor of the first director of the Residential College. James Robertson was a professor in the English department and also served on the LS&A Executive Committee. Robertson was part of the original planning committee for the RC in the mid-1960s. These were turbulent times in the United States and at the University of Michigan, with fierce debates about the war in Vietnam, racism in society, and environmental degradation. The Planning Committee was committed to creating a new kind of educational experience, one that fostered lasting connections between faculty and students, that enabled students to have a larger role in shaping their educational experience, and that connected college education to the world at large. Many of the qualities created by the founders of the RC remain its foundation today, including commitment to creative expression, to learning proficiency in a foreign language, to social justice, and to experiential courses taught by a dedicated faculty. Fortunately, James Robertson lived long enough to attend the 20th anniversary of the Residential College and to see that this bold experiment was thriving. He wrote that his experiences as a teacher and administrator in the RC were the most satisfying of his career. In 2011, the Robertson family established the James H. and Jean B. Robertson Memorial Lecture to address topics in education and the liberal arts. Our speaker today is Dr. Naomi André, professor in the Residential College in the Arts and Ideas program, in the Department of African and African American Studies, and in the Department of Women and Gender Studies. Naomi is a distinguished scholar of music history. She received her BA in music from Barnard College and a PhD in musicology from Harvard University. Her research focuses on opera, particularly in dimensions of gender, race, and voice. Her publications include topics in Italian opera, Schoenberg, women composers, and Blackness in opera. She has published 3 books, most recently, Black Opera, History, Power, Engagement, in 2018, in which she uses opera as a form of critical inquiry into cultural and political forces that are manifested in musical expression, performance, and social influence. One of the reviews of this book states, "This book reveals and examines the entire hidden history of race in opera and presents us with a vision of the art form as an inherently powerful and liberating cultural force." In addition, Naomi co-edited a 2021 collection of essays titled African Performance Arts and Political Acts that is due to be released any day by the University of Michigan Press. Naomi has served on the Graduate Alumni Council for Harvard University's Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, the Executive Committee for the Criminal Justice Program at the American Friends Service Committee in Ann Arbor, and on the Fulbright Senior Specialist Program as an evaluator. In 2019, Naomi was named the inaugural Scholar in Residence at the Seattle Opera, and in 2020, she joined with scholars around the world to co-found the Black Opera Research Network to explore the relationships between opera and race. Please join me in welcoming Naomi André for the Robertson Lecture.
Thank you, Catherine, for such a warm introduction. It is such a huge honor to be given this opportunity to give the Robertson Memorial Lecture. Thank you. I'm going to start with a little information about me and my own intellectual and professional journeys, because those really connect to what I'm going to talk about. As a Black woman who's an opera scholar at the University of Michigan, here in the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, I want to say a few words about that position, who I am, what I do, and how I got here. I've been at the University of Michigan for a good amount of time, since 1995. I was first appointed in the RC in 2006, 11 years after I first came to Michigan as an assistant professor in musicology in the School of Music, which is now called the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. After a difficult tenure case, and given my work in gender, race, and cultural themes in music, my appointment moved to LS&A in Women's Studies, now called Women and Gender Studies, and then a joint appointment soon followed in the residential college. This connection to the RC made a lot of sense. Here we are, the place on Central Campus where there's a hub for the arts, music, visual arts, theater, and creative writing. Though I did not know a whole lot about the RC at first, the more I got to know the RC, the more I fell in love with this space. It's so good for broad interdisciplinary conversations, and the community, students, staff, faculty, are so open-minded and generous. Being in the RC as a musicologist and opera scholar, I never felt like I had to apologize or change my focus. Even though opera has such elitist, wealthy, and white associations that has made it seem inappropriate for folks who are not elitist, who might not consider themselves wealthy, and who are non-white. The main point I want to make as I tell you a little of my own biography is that I'm someone who never seems to fit into expected categories. I'm a Black woman who studies opera, and that always surprises people. How did I get into opera? Most people think I've said I sing opera, and I say, oh no, I love to sing, for pleasure, but my career is writing about it. Here's the secret about how I got into opera. It's my mother. My mother studied opera at the Juilliard School in New York City. She was a high coloratura soprano, and she's still living, nearly 80 years old, and she doesn't really sing outside of home that much anymore. I did not grow up hearing her sing opera. In fact, she sang mainly in churches. I have loads of memories of her singing in churches and camp meetings as special music. She sang Handel, Mendelssohn, a lot of religious anthems in a classical style. Hence, even though I'm Black, I grew up hearing an operatic voice singing, semi-professionally in church settings and casually around the house, in the car. She sang all the time, and as lullabies as I was a kid. Growing up, I studied piano and played rather badly, though I really loved practicing. And I loved classical music. It wasn't until I went to college in New York City at Barnard College that I had the opportunity to go to the Metropolitan Opera regularly with friends. It didn't seem like such a big deal. We'd eat in the college dining hall, take the 20-minute subride to Lincoln Center, purchase a standing room ticket, which was standing room up in Family Circle was $5. Which was less than a movie ticket back then. It was easy and it was loads of fun. It was there when I first began to learn about the conventions of opera and its vast repertoire, not from textbooks, but from having that one-on-one watching it in person. In this space of the Robertson Lecture, I love being able to explore how there is so much to gain in a liberal arts education, something we do so well here at the RC. Well, the first half of my education in early professional history focused on learning the terms and of the conversation around musicology and opera. Since the early 2000s, I've been able to formulate my own questions about opera and to explore more fully what I saw on stage and what I did not see. My first book, Voicing Gender, asked questions around women, power, and authority in early 19th century Italian opera. Unlike later 19th century opera, where the heroine and the hero almost always die, that didn't happen before 1830. In fact, it was odd to have death on the opera stage, and most characters survived the end of the opera in the primo Ottocento, the first years of the 19th century. There was also a convention where women could sing male characters and embody heroic roles. Women also sang female characters, not a surprise. So overall, it was a fun inversion of the Elizabethan Shakespeare stage, where men performed all the roles. Here in opera, women got to sing across gender. Women had authority and power on the opera stage, and this was not unusual. This was the norm for about 30 years in Italy. On the left side of the slide, you can see the book cover for my first book, and there are 3 images on it. From left to right, there's Giambattista Velluti, who was the last of the great castrato singers to sing in opera. He retired in 1830. And yes, let me just say, the castrati started as young boys who had the orchiectomy surgery before puberty, and their voices never dropped or matured in their uninterrupted puberty, thus preserving their boy's voice. I say a bit more about this in the book, since it affected also the way people thought about characters of gender and sex designations at the turn of the 18th into the 19th century. But I'll sort of leave that here. So the first picture on the left is Giambattista Velluti. The middle picture is of Maria Malibran, a singer who sang both female roles and male roles. Giuditta Pasta is on the right in one of her signature roles, the title character of Rossini's Tancredi, which was an opera from 1813 based on Voltaire's play Tancred from 1760. Giuditta Pasta and Maria Malibran sang leading female and male characters throughout their career. On the right side of the slide, in the other picture, you can see Marilyn Horne in a more modern production from the 1980s in the title role of Rossini's Tancredi, wearing that same type of warrior helmet that Pasta wore, singing the voice of the hero. Around 1830, this started to change, and the tenor became the accepted voice of the hero. The book goes into more detail to outline this history, but what I found fascinating was tracing a type of oral genealogy for how masculinity and femininity were blurred. Women's voices had specific evolving meanings in the first half of the 19th century in Italian opera. My work now moves in a few contrapuntal directions, and I'm going to jump quickly to a recent experience that brings some of these things together, and then I'll back up a little to provide further context. A few years ago, in April 2018, I was asked by British CNN editor to write about Beyoncé's concert film Homecoming as it intersected with the operatic. This gave me fantastic sort of permission to articulate something I was already thinking, but hadn't quite made it to the surface. The 2 phone calls with CNN style editor Fiona Sinclair Scott were loads of fun. And we put together a piece that helped me think out loud and brought in Carl Dahlhaus's construction of tableau and shock for French Grand Opera with the pageantry and staging of Homecoming. The film had a big, spectacular sets of an HBCU, historically black college and university, an HBCU drumline with fantastic fireworks and bright colors. The switch from yellow to fuchsia and then back again were part of this incredible spectacle. And then the act would suddenly change with the entrance of someone or a new song, adding some new energy to the overall drama of the plot. This is an operatic technique, and I'm not saying that Beyoncé knew this, but she was definitely creating drama in an operatic fashion in Homecoming. In this piece, I was also able to bring Marian Anderson's historic performance on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial on April 9th, 1939. It was an Easter Sunday. I brought up Marian Anderson in this essay because she had been denied access to Constitution Hall for a concert to give a concert in Constitution Hall. And the Daughters of the American Revolution, the DAR, had custodianship of Constitution Hall. And they thought that even though she was one of the leading operatic classical voices of the time, she was black and was not allowed to sing in that segregated space. I put Anderson's concert on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and that concert was helped by Eleanor Roosevelt, then First Lady, married to President Franklin Roosevelt. And I put that concert in conversation with Beyoncé's groundbreaking Coachella concerts, which provided the backbone for the Homecoming concert film. Beyoncé's concerts were nearly 80 years later on April 14th and 21st, 2018. Both Anderson and Beyoncé were groundbreaking moments when Black women's voices filled a space that had previously been considered viable for whites only. Looking at gender and representation in opera was still new when I was in graduate school. I was part of a growing feminist criticism in musicology in the late 1980s and 1990s. That has now become a much more acceptable line of inquiry in the discipline, but back then it wasn't. By the early 2000s, I knew I could no longer keep quiet about questions around race, ethnicity, and casting in opera. Though I had always noticed it, I'd learned that it was something that was not considered polite to talk about. When I would casually mention the practice of blacking up the title characters in Verdi's Aida and Otello, or the use of yellowface in Puccini's Madama Butterfly and Turandot, people would say, "Naomi, come on, you know that's not real. It doesn't mean a thing. Why are you being so sensitive?" Yet unfortunately, these images do mean something. In the United States, blackface references the practice of slavery, where Black people's humanity was called into question. Additionally, blackface recalls the minstrelsy tradition, where negative stereotypes about Black people were propagated and continue to haunt many ideas about and images of Black folks up into the present. Yellowface is also a damaging practice, as it devalues and frequently exoticizes the rich cultural traditions of East Asian, South Asian, and Southeast Asian peoples. Due to the sensitive nature of these images and the harm that can follow, I'm not going to show examples of blackface and yellowface in opera here. If you are not familiar with these traditions, let me be clear. Blackface and yellowface makeup had been, up through the pandemic when virtually all performances stopped, these practices had been regularly used on all opera stages around the world. The few opera companies that did not use this practice had only recently stopped within the past few years in the mid-2010s. The first performances of these works, for example, Verdi's Aida in 1871 and his Otello from 1887, as well as Puccini's Madama Butterfly from 1904 and Turandot, first performed in 1926, all of these first performances were performed where the title role and other racialized characters were portrayed by white singers who wore makeup to darken their skin and appropriate a racial ethnicity, in these cases Black or Asian, to appropriate this racial ethnicity that was not their own. The makeup, clothing, accoutrements, and behaviors were chosen to make the illusion seem more real to Western audiences. Up until the pandemic, the makeup and appropriation continued in opera performance. For many years, the opera stage had been the only place where this happened without comment. Film, theater, Broadway shows, musical theater, television, and even most high school productions abandoned this practice by the early 2000s, if not before. Now, as opera seasons are cautiously opening up this season, it will be an interesting situation to see the performance practice of the current moment, past the summer of 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement, and when many arts organizations have hired anti-racist diversity personnel. We are poised for new practices and policies of representation to be adapted. My recent work has taken a very intersectional turn, where I bring issues around gender, race, nation, and socioeconomic access together, as I've been analyzing opera in the United States, Europe, and South Africa. I have been the lead editor for two collections of essays, Blackness in Opera from 2012, and African Performance Arts and Political Acts, that is coming out this fall, any day, from the University of Michigan Press and their African Perspective series. My book, Black Opera, History, Power, Engagement, from 2018, began to open up a space where I could bring into focus the legacy of blackface on the opera stage, as well as to move forward for opening up new conversations about thinking how opera has meaning today. The cover of Black Opera is intentionally provocative. Here is the gorgeous South African soprano Nolovuiso Mpofo, known as Vuvu, although I haven't met her, but I've heard. But here she is dressed as the title character in Donizetti's 1835 opera, Maria Stuarda. This opera is based on the historical Mary Stuart, the Mary Queen of Scots, also known as Mary I, who reigned over Scotland from December of 1542 to July of 1567. In this book cover, I wanted to focus and play with the ideas of representation and makeup, how it uses the image of the Tudor-style makeup on a Black South African singer, Mpofo, as a subtle commentary on the practices of blackface and yellowface today in opera. This white powder was considered a standard makeup for women during this Tudor time, thought to have been started by Elizabeth I after smallpox heavily marked her face with scars. In any case, I found the juxtaposition of a Black singer wearing white powder makeup as a moment when such issues felt like they were jumping off the page, encompassing the past up through this ever-changing present. In Black Opera, I've presented two paradigms that I'm currently building off of: the Black shadow culture in opera and engaged musicology. I'll start with engaged musicology. Engaged musicology is a paradigm for music analysis that brings in multiple perspectives as opposed to a single so-called objective, authoritative voice. I break this down into three rubrics. The first is who created the work? Who was part of the compositional team who created and developed this narrative? Composers, librettists, collaborators, such as the different directors, musical and theatrical directors, as well as important friends who might have helped with the collaboration. The second rubric is who is performing the work? Who is on stage embodying the music and the performance? Who is literally bringing these characters and stories to life? And the third rubric is who is in the audience? Who is interpreting this work in print? Who are we as we watch and consume this art? Who am I as the writer, author, scholar, historian? What experiences am I bringing into my understanding and analysis of this work? These parameters are meant to complement the traditional rubrics that look at compositional genesis, the style and genre of a work, and an understanding of the first performance. And engaged musicology stretches this historical analysis into the present with an interest in how a performed work that is embodied by artists today has meaning today by current audiences. Additionally, the vantage points of the reviewers who are writing about the work are important, for they shape the questions and interpretation the reviewer brings to the analysis. The other major trope in this study that has been a jumping off point for additional work is the concept of the Black shadow culture in opera. This Black shadow culture features Black participation and Black subjects in ways that involve deep engagement and care in the representation that is not present frequently in the dominant culture or in the other operas, many operas written by non-Black composers that are in the mainstream operatic canon. A Black shadow culture in opera includes operas that bring Black perspectives and experiences to the forefront in terms of how the story is told and who is telling the story. So I have, as you can see on the slides, a few examples of shadow culture operas. There's, going back to the 19th century and the Harlem Renaissance, there's Harry Lawrence Freeman, Scott Joplin. Mid-century, we have William Grant Still. Then starting in 1986, there seems to be this new wave with Anthony Davis, who's still living. His first opera is X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X, Amistad from 1997, and the Central Park Five, just from 2019. Margaret Garner, Adolphus Hailstork, Leslie Adams, Regina Harris Baiocchi, yes, this is a call out, George Lewis, I'm saying their names, Dorothy Rudd Moore, Richard Thompson, Nkiru Okoye. These are just some of the people, and this last list are the composers I've spoken with personally who said they would be writing more operas, and they all have at least one, but if there were better prospects and opportunities to have them performed. Here's another slide with additional shadow culture operas, Charlie Parker's Yardbird, The Summer King, an opera on the life of Josh Gibson, which is, Josh Gibson was in the National Negro Baseball League. It was thought that he was going to integrate baseball rather than Jackie Robinson. Josh Gibson was called the Black Babe Ruth. He was a power hitter and a catcher. We Shall Not Be Moved by the 1985 Move bombing that our colleague Heather Thompson is writing about right now. That was in Philadelphia. I Dream, not a surprise from the title, is about Martin Luther King by British Black composer Douglas Tappan. So there are so many operas. These are just a few that I've pulled out. I also have a slide of current operas, and I will talk about them a little bit later. But these first three operas all premiered the summer of 2019, right before the pandemic. The Central Park Five by Anthony Davis, with a libretto by Richard Wesley, that was premiered in Long Beach Opera. In June of 2019, I got to see this performance. Fire Shut Up in My Bones by Terence Blanchard and Casey Lemons. That was premiered by Opera Theater of St. Louis in June of 2019 and was just performed at the end of September at the Metropolitan Opera. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then there's Blue by Janine Tesori and librettist Tazewell Thompson. That was commissioned and performed by the Glimmerglass Opera in upstate New York in July and August of 2019, and that also just came to Michigan through the Michigan Opera Theater in September at the Aretha Franklin Amphitheater, which I got to see and it was amazing. Nkiru Okoye is another person I want to put in this list with her Harriet Tubman, When I Crossed That Line to Freedom opera that was first performed in 2014 and is getting more performances. Sadly, a couple were canceled during the pandemic. And then her Tales from the Briar Patch, where the first act was with librettist Carmen Moore, that the first act was workshopped up at the School of Music in Professor Louise Toppin's class right before the pandemic. My work has identified some of the background conditions of looking at this Black shadow culture in opera, a tradition hidden but currently getting more attention. I'm currently focusing on two directions for moving this research forward. The first route outlines a broad framework for mapping Black experience in opera in the United States from the 19th century through 1955 with Marian Anderson. Yes, that same person who sang on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1939. In 1955, Marian Anderson sang in a role, the role was Ulrica in Verdi's opera Un ballo in maschera. Marian Anderson sang Ulrica at the Metropolitan Opera and symbolically desegregated the genre of opera for all companies in the world. Examining Black opera companies, singers, and composers, I trace a foundation for Black opera studies that illuminates a shadow opera culture hidden from view, happening simultaneously as the mainstream tradition. The second route focuses on recurring tropes in specific operas, from the past up to the present, with an emphasis on operas in the present. And these are operas by Black composers and librettists that shape their aesthetics. I put these operas in counterpoint to the primarily white European, Western European, American tradition through an engaged critical analysis, this engaged musicology that was asking who are the creators, who's on stage, who is in the audience. Taking my work forward, I analyze how the opera stage has become a space for Black narratives and social justice by revealing a broad shared humanity created through artistry and relatability in the stories, music, and drama. Though Black Opera was the title of my book, I want to unpack that title just a little bit. And just as a side note, this was not the original title I had chosen. It was one that my editor said, well, marketing had come up with this, and since they know about selling books, I said, okay. I pushed back a little bit, but my original title was something like Engaging Black Experiences in Opera, Studies in the US and South Africa. So yeah, I think they did a good job with the new title. I wrote about the title in the opening chapter of Black Opera, and the real question that emerged is, how does one think about a history of Blackness in opera? Black opera, what is this? This slide takes some of the themes I use in defining the Black shadow culture in opera and extends them. Black opera, what I like to think of as a construction of Black experiences in opera, encompasses a wide variety of activities, such as operas by Black composers and librettists with stories about Black people sung by Black singers. Yet having Black people involved in all of these facets is not the only configuration. Black opera also includes interracial partnerships that involve non-Black collaborators. For example, works incorporating Black narratives by non-Black writers, or plots where the race is not specified as Black, but singers of color are given the opportunity to perform in repertory operas. One of my primary goals is to build on earlier works to flesh out a more complete history of Black opera. While research is underway on specific singers, companies, and composers, my work encompasses the interlocking components that explore how these works fit together and shape a bigger picture of Black achievement in opera. Another one of my central goals is to map out the trends of a close study of individual operas to add specificity to this bigger picture. I have access to cataloged opera materials from the past. Increasingly, new works are being made available digitally, as well as communication with collaborations with many of the current generation of composers and librettists whose operas are getting commissioned and performed today. Since 2018, I've also been working with a growing number of opera companies and singers, where I have had fortuitous opportunities to attend performances, participate in panels about these works, and write program essays where I've gotten to know specific composers, librettists, singers, and administrators who are bringing these operas to life. In these last few slides, I want to outline a few areas I'm going to focus on for organizing this work. I'm going to be looking at Black opera companies. As you can see, I've mentioned a few. Theodore Drury and his Theodore Drury Grand Opera Company was active every year, just about every year, from 1900 to 1907, and then sporadically until 1938. He is the first of these two singer impresarios with Mary Caldwell Dawson, with her National Negro Opera Company that from 1941 through 1962 was performing operas. And the house in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, has just moved on to a national registry, which is getting help for rehabilitating the house and bringing this more into history. So Theodore Drury and Mary Caldwell Dawson were the first Black singer impresarios who launched companies that lasted several seasons in the United States. And you can also see that there are several other companies that popped up for 1 or 2 seasons or around one opera or performance that go back into the years right after the Civil War. I'm also going to talk about 2 important singers from the 19th century who we know a little bit more about. Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, who was born into slavery and then manumitted and set free, given voice lessons, and eventually sang for Queen Victoria in England in the 1850s. Matilda Joyner Ciceretta Jones is the other singer who's well known at this time, and yet there were many others. Thomas Bowers, Marie Celica Williams, Flora Batson, the list goes on. My next layer of analysis examines recurring tropes and main topics that began to create an aesthetics by using folk melodies, rhythms, and forms, as well as specific locations. New Orleans, former plantations, Haiti, Western African countries. as well as multi-dimensional honorable portrayals of Black folks. Three central themes have emerged, and those are the reference to the tom-tom drum as a connection to Africa, especially by the first generations coming of age during the Harlem Renaissance, who were born free after the Civil War. The second theme is that I've found the adaptation of Black Atlantic diasporic religions, such as voodoo and connections to a supernatural through superstition or conjure. And these Black Atlantic diasporic religions were a source of empowerment and resistance. The third is the construction of the American dream that brings together respectability, aspiration, and desires for assimilation as full members of American society. This summer of 2019, so just a couple of years ago, I've hinted before, but it was rather magical. 3 Black operas were premiered, and they are currently making a big splash. There's Terence Blanchard and Casey Lemon's Fire, Shut Up in My Bones, which is the first opera by a Black composer to be performed at the Metropolitan Opera. It was performed on September 27th, 2020, and the Metropolitan Opera was opened in 1883. So in its 138-year history, first opera by a Black composer, first time there was a libretto by a Black librettist, Casey Lemons, who was also the film director of Harriet to Eve's Bayou and many others. And it was the first time there was a Met co-director or a Met director who was a Black person. And this is Camille Brown, who was the co-director with James Robinson. She also was the choreographer. Anthony Davis's The Central Park Five, which premiered in Long Beach Opera in 2019, was the first opera by a Black composer to win the Pulitzer Prize in music, the first opera by a Black composer to win the Pulitzer Prize. And then Janine Tesori and Tazewell Thompson's opera Blue won the Music Critics Association of North America Award for Best New Opera, and as far as I know, is the first of these 2019 operas that has a commercial CD recording that is in the works to be released soon. I know about this because I'm writing the program essay. This is a particularly momentous time in history, following the especially complicated politics of race relations in the United States after the presidencies of Barack Obama and Donald Trump. With 3 big premieres in 2019, The Central Park Five, Blue, and Fire, Shut Up in My Bones, the Black Lives Matter energies from 2020 that still continue, the number of opera companies that have newly invested in their diversity, equity, inclusion work, and the Metropolitan Opera opening their 2021 season with the first opera by a Black composer, we are poised in an exciting and historic way to learn new lessons about Black history, justice, and humanity from an unlikely and yet increasingly emblematic place, opera. Thank you.